Finally, after you've looked at clarity, tone, and organization, and only then should you pay attention to correctness, in other words, issues of grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Students often focus on these issues because they're relatively easy to fix and because high school English teachers have given them the idea that that's the important stuff, but it's really not nearly as important as the bigger issues we've been discussing. Even within the issue of correctness, there are various things to pay attention to in various orders. I would say first you want to look at sentence structure, things like sentence fragments and run-on sentences. Then look at punctuation, because punctuation is not as important as sentence structure. And finally, the very last thing you should pay attention to is spelling issues. Spelling just usually isn't a very big deal. Sentence fragments are among the most serious sentence problems because they leave out information. That's a real problem. Usually sentence fragments have to do with the lack of a verb, and sometimes you can see that lack of a verb in the sentence. So in these examples, then I attended Morris Junior High, a school that was a bad experience. Is there a sentence fragment in here? Yeah, the second sentence, a school that was a bad experience, is a sentence fragment. There's no real verb here. The word was is a verb, but because it's in a relative clause, starting with that, it can't be the main verb of the sentence. It'd be like saying a guy who is 6 feet tall. Well, is a verb, but it can't stand by itself unless it's part of an independent clause. Here, another example. Within each group, a wide range of features to choose from, it was difficult to distinguish between them. Is there a sentence fragment here? Yeah, the first sentence is. Even though we have the verb choose, it's in the phrase to choose. In other words, it's called an infinitive phrase. And infinitives can't be the main verb of a sentence either. You can't to choose something. You can have chosen, you can choose, you will choose, but to choose is just the general concept of choosing, so it can't stand by itself as the main verb. Making up his mind quickly, Jim ordered 24 red roses for his wife, hoping she would accept his apology. Well, in this case, there are actually two sentence fragments, the first sentence and the third sentence. Both of them have those ing verbs, which, if you remember from earlier in the semester, cannot be main verbs either. In fact, they're not really verbs. Make and hope are verbs, but making and hoping what are called verbals. They're verbs that have been turned into something else, in this case adjectives, so they can't operate as verbs in the sentence. As Christmas grows near, I find myself looking back into my childhood days at fun-filled times of snowball fights. To think about this makes me happy. Do you think there's a sentence fragment here? Well, in fact, though it may look like the last sentence is a sentence fragment, there really aren't any incomplete sentences here. To think about this is not, you can't use to think as the main verb of the sentence, because again it's an infinitive phrase. But makes is a regular finite verb, is the word we use, and so it can stand by itself. Run-on sentences are less serious than sentence fragments, but they're also more common. As we've already talked about earlier in the semester, comma splices are especially common. A comma splice occurs when you take two complete sentences into two independent clauses and join them together using just a comma. You can't do that. A comma is not strong by itself to join two complete sentences. So in this example, Amoya Johnson discusses the racist language in her art. She is co-founder of a successful African history project. If you look at that sentence carefully, you'll see that what comes before the comma. Amoya Johnson discusses the racist language in her article. That's a complete sentence that can stand by itself. But also what comes after the comma. She is co-founder of the African history project. Could also be a sentence by itself. Two complete sentences, you can't just use a comma. So what can you do to fix it? Well, instead of a comma, you could use a period. Periods work. In other words, you could just take just two sentences and separate them. Put a period them in a capital letter at the beginning of the next sentence. In other words, make that into two regular sentences. So if you had something like, I completed my academic proposal, I have not submitted it yet, that's a comma splice because both I completed my academic proposal and I have not submitted it yet are independent clauses, complete sentences. But if you separated them into two sentences, I completed my academic proposal, period, I have not submitted it yet, that would be fine. Or, if you don't want to use a period, you could use a semicolon. Semicolons and periods are grammatically equivalent, so separating two independent clauses with a semicolon is just the same as separating it with a period. The only difference is a semicolon kind of keeps them together in terms of the meaning. It means they're closely related. So you could say, I completed my academic proposal, semicolon. I have not submitted it yet. That would be fine as well. There are other ways to fix comma splices. You could use a coordinating conjunction. These are the words for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, sometimes called, I'm sorry to tell you, the fanboys, because the first letters make that acronym. If you use a coordinating conjunction with a comma, that gives the comma enough strength to join the two complete sentences. So you could say something like, I completed my academic proposal, but I have not submitted it yet. The comma by itself isn't strong enough, but the comma with the but is strong enough to join two complete sentences. You could also change the structure of the sentence by making part of the sentence subordinate to the other. In other words, making one part of the sentence the main clause and making the other part of the sentence a subordinate clause. Now, subordinate clauses, you have to know what subordinating conjunctions are, but some that you're familiar with would be things like although or since or because. So you could say something like, I completed my academic proposal, although I have not submitted it yet, and that would be fine. What you can't do, however, is use what are called conjunctive adverbs. These are words like however, nevertheless, and therefore, which kind of sound like subordinating conjunctions, but they're not. Conjunctive adverbs introduce a complete sentence by themselves. So you can't say something like, I completed my academic proposal, however, I have not submitted it yet. Even though it sounds a lot like saying I completed my academic proposal, although I have not submitted it yet, grammatically it's a different kind of sentence. You'd have to, in this case, make it into two sentences. I completed my academic proposal, period. However, I have not submitted it yet. In general, if I can give you advice for revising your writing, it would be to read your paper. You'd be surprised how many papers are turned in pretty clearly never having been read by the author, with such glaring mistakes, things like words left out or sentences repeated twice in a row. It makes it clear that the author hasn't spent the 10 minutes or so it would take to read the paper to try to catch any problems, whether they're with clarity, tone, organization, or correctness. Then, read it again. You're probably going to have to read your paper more than once. In fact, I'd say you probably might have to read it more than twice. Reading it aloud as a third time might be particularly useful. Sometimes your ear can catch things that your eye won't catch. Your eye moves pretty quickly and sometimes can ignore errors or problems, but your ear will hear the problems. Finally, another piece of advice is to have someone else read the paper to you. That way you've got two sets of ears. In other words, the person reading the paper can hear it, and you can hear it also. Sometimes it also makes a difference to hear your writing coming out of someone else's mouth. You can catch problems that you wouldn't catch even if you were saying it, because if they struggle with meaning, for example, that can be a tip-off to you. There's a problem there. Whatever you do, look for the problems in your writing. Try to revise, try to improve.